All right, folks, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's Dr. Kaz, and this is the Chapter 5 Tissue Lab Slide Identification. So we're going to run through some of the slides here that you are responsible for Chapter 5 for the first lab test. So let's jump into it here and talk about simple squamous epithelial tissue. As you recall, you'll know some of the characteristics of simple squamous epithelium. Simple being how many cell layers are involved, and since it's simple and we know that it's just one cell layer. And squamous being that it's a flattened cell, and as such, the nucleus is also going to be flattened. So this particular epithelial sample is going to be found in areas of filtration, absorption, secretion. The alveoli are the tiny air sacs of the lungs here. So this is a great place for filtration and absorption. You'll also find it in the lumen, which is what it lines the lumen of blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. At that point, we call that epithelium endothelium, and that will be the inner layer of these structures. And then finally, we already talked about the serous membranes, the body cavities. Okay, we were talking about the various pleura, peritoneum, pericardium, and so forth, and we refer to that as mesothelium when we're talking about serous membranes of these body cavities here. The next type of epithelial tissue is going to be simple cuboidal epithelium. If you notice here, the sample that we have here, you've got a nice cell here that's about as tall as it is wide, and the nucleus is nice and spherical, and it's located directly in the center of the cell. Okay, so this big black line that you see here, that's the basement membrane. And as you recall, simple epithelium, all the cells make direct contact with the basement membrane. And we're going to find this type of epithelium in areas that are going to be for secretion and filtration. So some of the examples listed here: lining of the thyroid gland, wall of the kidney tubules, great place for absorption and whatnot, and then the surface of the ovary. So this type of epithelium is great for the secretory regions of a lot of the glands, and we'll talk about the difference between the secretory and the conducting portion of glands later on. All right, moving on to the next type of epithelium, we've got simple columnar, but specifically non-ciliated simple columnar. Non-ciliated simple columnar, all right, it will not have any cilia involved. It will have microvilli, which is one of the apical surface modifications that we talked about. The three were the microvilli, also known as a brush border when we're looking at histological slides. And then we also have the cilia, which is a hair-like appendage, and then the flagella or flagellum, which is like a tail that's attached to the cell, and it's for mobility and movement of the cell itself, where the cilia will move back and forth, and the cell will remain stationary, but the cilia will move things past the cell. So if you notice here, this type of epithelium, simple columnar, the columnar cell is as tall. All right, you can see how tall it is, but it's going to be not as wide as it is tall. And the nuclei, these dark black structures, are going to be located towards the basilar end of or closer to the bottom of the cell. All right, and they're going to be oval shaped. Then you can see we have some other cells lining throughout the epithelium that we're going to talk about in a second here. But we're going to find this type of epithelium, the non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium, pretty much in the majority of the digestive tract. So pretty much from the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, all the way down to the anus there. And it's going to be lining most of the digestive tract, pretty much from the stomach to the anus. So that cell that I was going to point out to you earlier on is called the goblet cell. This is a unicellular cell, all right? And it's a glandular cell. And this cell will produce mucin, all right, not to be confused with mucus, all right, but once the mucin, all right, it's a glycoprotein, once that mixes, all right, with water, it turns into mucus, okay? Helps to add lubrication out into the digestive tract, and in some cases it helps with the decreasing of the pH. As you know, the stomach contents have a low pH and can be quite acidic, so the mucus can help to neutralize that somewhat. All right, then on this slide here you can see the microvilli, this little fin-like structure here, okay? Tough to see, all right, but that's the microvilli right here, also known as the brush border. All right, and then our slide here will also depict this kind of dark staining colored structure here at the bottom where this dashed black and yellow line is. That is our basement membrane. As you recall, like I said before, simple epithelium, all the cells make contact with that basement membrane. All right, let's move into the other type of epithelium, the stratified epithelium. Stratified epithelium has 2 or more cell layers, okay? And we're going to talk about our first type of stratified epithelium, and that's going to be the stratified squamous epithelium, but specifically non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, okay? Keratin is a protein that a cell will produce, and what that protein does is it makes the cell tougher, and in doing so it eventually kills the cell. So it's this protein that fills the cell up, kills off all the organelles, destroys the nucleus eventually, and what will happen is that cell now becomes a little bit more resilient, stronger, more, I won't say impervious to damage, but it's much more resistant to damage. We'll see it in our skin. All right, but this is the non-keratinized type, so that means that all the cells that we're going to be looking at here do not produce keratin, and that they're all going to be alive. Now you can see here, all right, in some of these cells, we don't see, this is a nucleus, by the way, this dark staining structure. But in all these cells, we don't see the nucleus there. And you have to understand something. When you prepare a slide, you are taking a 3-dimensional structure, all right, and you're making it 2-dimensional, all right? So when you make these slide preparations, you're going to be missing certain things, okay? So if this is the nucleus right here, all right, and here's the nucleus over here for this cell, all right, and here's the nucleus here for this cell, and here's a nucleus for this cell, and here's a nucleus for this cell. And what we do is we take the slice, we cut right down this area, okay? So say this slide right here that we're looking at is the slice that I just drew. Well, if you look closely, you can see, yeah, the slice that we took hits the nucleus here, but it doesn't get the nucleus here. It doesn't get the nucleus here. That's why some of these cells look to be without a nucleus. Doesn't mean that they're dead, okay? Most of the time when you don't see a cell with a nucleus, some cells don't have a nuclei. Many cells do, okay? But in keratinized epithelium, we won't see a nucleus because it's died, it's gone away, all right? But what I tell folks in most situations when they're not sure, look at the apical layer, okay, the top layer here of our epithelium. If you can see a nucleus in any of those cells, all right, then it's assumed that you will have a nuclei in all the cells below it. Here's a nucleus here, okay, here's another one here, okay, there's another one over here, all right? So all these cells, all right, their nuclei are either to the left or the right of the slice, okay, in front of it, behind it, wherever, okay? So, it's kind of a long explanation here, all right? But this is the non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelial cell. Remember, stratified epithelium is it's one of its good functions or main functions is protection, okay? So we're going to see it in places that unequal stresses. Oral cavity, your mouth, right? Think about it. All the times that you chew food, especially if it's hard food, it's scraping to get up against your cheek, right? It's beneficial to have stratified epithelium there. Same thing with your throat and your pharynx, right? When that food gets swallowed, it can be quite, I'm not going to say damaging, but it's a lot of stress on those structures there. Your esophagus, right? That's the tube that connects your throat to your stomach. And then also the vagina and the anus. So a lot of these areas that you can see here are, one, going to be moist areas, right? And two, are going to be an entrance into your body or an exit from your body, okay? So that's another way that you can kind of remember about the non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, right? The next type of epithelium I wanted to show you was the transformer epithelium. All right, this is the transitional epithelium. All right, we're going to mainly find this in the urinary bladder. All right, but this is the epithelium that changes shape depending on the type of stress that is placed upon it. All right, be it stress full bladder versus an empty bladder. Okay, so again, like I said, you're going to find this epithelium in the urinary bladder. Okay, and when it's a full bladder, all of these cells will be flattened. And when we go through the lecture type of component or the PowerPoint presentations, we'll see that a little bit more. Okay, I can show you both the relaxed and the stretched transitional epithelium. The next type of epitheliums are pseudostratified, syllated columnar epithelium. Remember, this is pseudo being false. All right, this is the epithelium that's going to appear to be stratified, right? But it's not, right? Which means every single one of the cells that's pictured here, okay, is going to be making contact with the basement membrane down here, right? But not all of them reach the apical surface, right? And it looks stratified because if you look here, you can see right here these black circles again, these black dots. Those are the nuclei, right? You got some nuclei kind of in the middle of our the layer here, most of them at the bottom, all right? But they're alternating in height, all right? How far they are from the basement membrane, so it gives it that stratified appearance. But again, it is not stratified, all right? So hence we call it the pseudostratified syllated columnar epithelium. So you're going to see, and it's not the best slide here for it, but here, kind of this fuzziness that you're seeing on top there, all right? That's the cilia. If you were to zoom in, this is a pretty low magnification slide, but if you were to zoom in, you'd be able to see it a little bit better, all right? The cilia there, all right, but just take my word for it, that is the cilia. And also in this type of epithelium, we're going to have the goblet cell. The goblet cell is going to be producing that mucin, which makes the mucus. So it gives the cilia something to do. Think about it. The cilia's job is to move stuff around, all right? And so if it doesn't have anything to move around, it's not really going to be doing anything. So the goblet cell gives it work. It makes the mucin, mixes with the water, and then that cilia can now start to beat back and forth and move that mucus, all right, away, okay? So we're going to see this type of epithelium in a lot of areas that have to do with our respiratory tract, all right? The nasal cavity, your mouth, all right? Some of the parts of your throat, the pharynx there, your voice box, the larynx, the windpipe, the trachea, and some of the bronchi. So you're going to see it mainly in the larger airways, okay? So keep that in mind, that ciliated columnar epithelium, all right, that's going to, or excuse me, the pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium is going to be mainly associated with the respiratory system. All right, let's jump on here into what's called glandular epithelial tissue. You'll see this, you'll talk about this, I won't say much more detail in chapter 17 when you get to the endocrine system, because this is actually a picture of the thyroid gland, right? But if you look closely at this type of epithelium, okay, glandular epithelial tissue, all right, is basically simple cuboidal epithelium, right? These are cuboidal cells. They have the nuclei at the center, nice spherical shaped nuclei. All right, this dark red line here that you can see a little bit better in some areas, tougher to see in here. All right, that's the basement membrane. All right, so that's what these cells sit on, and they produce, all right, this substance here in the middle, all right, and that's called thyroglobulin. Well, it's actually not thyroglobulin, all right, but it's colloid, and it's a viscous protein substance there, okay. And this substance here is going to help to make, all right, your thyroid hormone, all right. But keep in mind that this is, all right, because it is a type of epithelial tissue that produces and makes things. This is glandular epithelial tissue. All right, the next type of epithelial tissue is going to be stratified cuboidal, all right, and stratified being 2 or more cell layers thick, all right, cuboidal being the shape of the cell. If you look here, all right, you have, all right, some of these cells have that nice spherical, all right, shaped nucleus. This is a beautiful picture of a cuboidal nucleus here. All right, and then right on below it, this is going to be your other layers here. So you'll see this type of epithelium here, stacked nuclei. They're relatively close together. All right, you'll definitely know the difference between stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar, because if you look close at the stratified cuboidal, the nuclei, there's not a lot of space in between the stratified nuclei and cuboidal. But compare it to stratified columnar. All right, look about all that space between the different layers of the columnar. There's quite a bit. Okay, quite a bit. So look at the stratified columnar, and here is the stratified cuboidal. Not a lot of space between the stratified cuboidal. Okay, so again, stratified cuboidal, we're going to find it helps with structural components to your glands in your body. So we're going to see this in the sweat gland ducts and the salivary gland ducts. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next type of epithelium, the non-ciliated stratified columnar epithelium. I just showed you a slide of this. Non-ciliated means, right, it's not going to have any cilia. Right. This is a relatively rare type of epithelium. Okay. And like I said before, these cells are going to be taller than they are wide. And another easy way to tell is that there's quite a bit of space in between the nuclei, all right, of one columnar cell and the other nuclei of another columnar epithelial cell below it. Okay, so again, we'll see this type of epithelium in some of our larger sweat glands and portions of the male urethra. All right, that concludes the epithelium. So the epithelium is the first of 4 tissue types in our body. Okay, there's quite a bit to it, so please take your time watching this video, review the slides in case you're wondering. There's quite a bit of material here. So let's move on to the second type of tissue in your body. This is the most diverse and abundant type of tissue in your body. This is connective tissue. And the first one that we're going to be looking at, it falls under the category of connective tissue proper, specifically loose connective tissue. And that's the areolar connective tissue. All right, areolar connective tissue is going to have a lot of ground substance, and that's what you can see here. All right, pretty much the components that make up connective tissue are going to be the cells, and then the material around the cells. All right, and that material around the cells is the extracellular matrix. Extracellular matrix is made up of ground substance, and we'll get into that more in lecture of what ground substance is. And it's also made up of protein fibers. And we're going to talk about a few of the protein fibers here. Here are these big, thick, all right, bundle-like fibers. That's the collagen. You can see it running this way. Here's one going up and down. All right, so any of these big, thick fibers, all right, that's going to be the collagen. The smaller ones here, these are going to be the elastic fibers. There's a great elastic fiber. It's kind of coiled up right here. Okay. Then you got a few a few cells here scattered throughout our slide. All right. So on this next slide here, you can see the arrow pointing to the collagen fiber there. Okay. And showing that's a much bigger protein fiber compared to this smaller guy, the elastic fiber. All right. Elastic fibers are stretchy, obviously, because elastic, but they can branch, all right, and they're smaller than the collagen. Collagen does not branch, all right. So we're going to find this type of connective tissue, all right, in the. Now I know we haven't talked about this yet, but when we get to the skin, we will, all right. In the papillary layer of your dermis, the dermis is the deeper layer of your skin. You have 2 layers to your skin, the epidermis and the dermis. And then we divide the dermis into 2 layers, the reticular layer and the papillary layer. Okay? And the papillary layer is the more superficial, lies right underneath the epidermis. And then just below the skin layer, all right, your skin, you have what's known as the subcutaneous layer. And that layer is just filled with our next type of connective tissue. All right? It's going to be filled with adipose connective tissue and areolar connective tissue when we talk about the subcutaneous layer. So adipose connective tissue, real easy. It's just fat cells. Okay, fat cells are the predominant cell type. All right, it's this big cell here, filled with lipids, fats. All right, and adipose connective tissue is going to be found all over our bodies. Okay, so here you can see our adipocyte. Some literature refers to it for the appearance of it as a signet ring appearance. Okay, because the nucleus gets pushed off to the side here. Right? So you're going to see this type of connective tissue, again, in that subcutaneous layer that I was telling you about, but anywhere you can find fat. Remember the functions of fat. One is energy storage, okay, cushioning, insulation. So a lot of the internal organs need insulation and cushioning. So you'll find adipose tissue, all right, surrounding several of your internal organs there, okay? And then it also accumulates in areas where you don't want it to. I don't need to get into that. All right. The next type of connective tissue is the reticular connective tissue. All right, all these black lines here, those are reticular protein fibers. All right, so you have three types of protein fibers: collagen protein fibers, all right, elastic protein fibers, and reticular protein fibers. We've seen the other two, but this is the other one here. So reticular connective tissue, think of it as compartments, all right, like a storage facility. Okay, you have all these little rooms in a storage facility. Well, that's what reticular connective tissue is like, right? And so here's a picture, right? This slide is showing you the reticular fibers. So pretty much any black line that you're seeing on this slide, right, is going to be a reticular fiber, okay? So this type of connective tissue has all these little compartments, which is wonderful for the immune system. So we're going to see it in a lot of immune system and lymphatic tissues. Okay, so your thymus gland is part of the immune system. Spleen, part of the lymphatic system. Liver, lymph nodes, bone marrow. All right. So we use this term stroma. All right. So the reticular tissue forms the stroma of the hollow organs in your body. And basically, what the stroma is, all these little compartments here. All right. You'll have different varying types of cells or tissue located inside of those stroma there. All right, so let's jump into another type of connective tissue. This still falls under the connective tissue proper. All right, but now we're going to move into what we call dense connective tissue. And there's three types of dense connective tissue. The first type is called dense regular connective tissue. All right, and so the connective tissue here that you see, all right, a lot of all this kind of orange coloration here that you've seen, those are collagen fibers. I'll even show you here in this next slide. Those are collagen fibers, and they're laid down one on top of the next, very similar to like lasagna noodles if you bake or cook. All right, but they're tightly packed together. All right, there's virtually no ground substance in between, and there's a majority of the tissue is collagen fibers. And collagen is very strong. It has the tensile strength of steel. So this type of connective tissue, this dense regular connective tissue, will be predominantly found, all right, in your tendons and your ligaments. Okay, tendons and ligaments. All right, the next type of dense connective tissue is dense irregular connective tissue. Okay. Now, this type of connective tissue does have a lot of collagen in it, but it doesn't have that same kind of regularity or uniformity to how it's arranged. It's better described as like swirls or grouping or clustering of collagen. All right, so you can see how it's all swirled here, but there is more ground substance in dense irregular connective tissue. Dense regular connective tissue does not have any ground substance. I shouldn't say does not have any, it has very little. Okay, and so this type of irregular connective tissue you'll find in several different areas, but it's great for multi-directional stresses, whereas dense regular connective tissue is really good in resisting stresses in one particular direction or two opposing directions. Whereas dense irregular connective tissue can handle multi-directional stresses. It's just not as strong as dense regular,
but it's great because it's located in the dermis layer of your skin. So you can pull your skin in a bunch of different layers, excuse me, a bunch of different directions, and it can resist a lot of that stress, all right, without being damaged. All right, same with the periosteum of the bone, which is a covering to your bone, all right, that this type of tissue is made of because you have tendons, all right, that attach to that periosteum and yanks on it. Perichondrium is the covering of cartilage. All right, and we'll see this type of material covering a lot of the capsules, and we'll talk more about capsules in 211 because they cover your liver and kidney and spleen, all right? All right, finally, our last type of dense connective tissue is the elastic connective tissue, right? So this type of connective tissue, the predominant protein fiber that you're going to see in it are these guys right here. These dark lines, these are elastic fibers. Okay, so elastic fibers, as you know, if you've worn any clothing with elastic in it, it's stretchy. It can stretch and it can recoil. Right? So we're going to find this type of connective tissue in some of our large arteries. Right? Perfect example is the aorta. If the aorta did not have this type of connective tissue inside of it, it wouldn't be able to stretch and handle situations in which the amount of blood being pumped out of your heart, all right, if it increases for whatever reason, exercise, stress, whatever, all right, if it didn't have that elastic tissue, it wouldn't be able to handle the capacitance or the volume of that blood. We'll also see in the trachea, all right, in the vocal cords, things that, again, have to change shape or become distorted from time to time, all right, and then rebound into their original configuration and shape. All right, let's move on into the next type of connective tissue class, which is what we call supportive connective tissue. And I'll talk about this in lecture if I haven't already, about the different categories to connective tissue. All right, you've got connective tissue proper, which is the first category. The second category, which we're about to talk about now, is supporting connective tissue. And then the last is fluid connective tissue. All right, so essentially the supportive connective tissue is going to be made up of bone and cartilage. Okay, so the first type of cartilage that we're going to talk about, because there's three types, right? We have hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. All right, so this is hyaline cartilage. And the predominant cell type in hyaline cartilage is the chondrocyte. Okay, those are mature cartilage cells. All right, so you see on the slide here a red circle with an arrow pointing inside the circle. Okay, that arrow is pointing inside the circle to a chondrocyte. All right, now that circle represents a space or chamber that we call a lacuna. Okay, so if on a test question you get name the space or the chamber, and you see a red outline there, or blue or green outline, whatever, with an arrow pointing to it, you're going to say lacuna. If the arrow is pointing inside of the lacuna, then it's asking you to name the structure inside, which is a chondrocyte. All right? We're going to see this type of tissue. All right. All right. First of all, hyaline cartilage is the most abundant type of cartilage. All right. So we're going to see this, the tip of your nose. If you ever look at a skeleton, you notice that it doesn't have a full nose on it. That's because that tissue at the end is cartilage. All right. The trachea. All right. Larynx, again, there's your voice box. All right. The costocartilage, which is your rib cartilage. Okay. And then it's going to cover the ends of your long bones. And at that point, we refer to it as articular cartilage. So when bones are connecting to one another at a joint, right, those bones have a lining at just the end there of this hyaline cartilage. And it helps to reduce friction, right? It acts on a minor capacity as a shock absorber, right? When you're developing inside your mom, all right, as a fetus, at first, when your skeleton starts to grow, it's made up of this type of cartilage. And then it converts over into bone. We get to learn about that in chapter 7. All right. Second type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. Okay. And elastic cartilage is very similar to hyaline cartilage with some of its characteristics, all right, in regards to the predominant cell type in the elastic cartilage, all right, is going to be the chondrocyte. So here again, you can see the arrows pointing to a chondrocyte right here. That's the mature cartilage cell. And these chondrocytes, all right, just like in hyaline cartilage, all right, in elastic cartilage, they'll live in the lacuna. All right, the lacuna on this slide is outlined by a black-green hashed line here. All right, and so inside, where I'm putting my pointer now, all right, that's where the chondrocyte is, right there. This is the lacuna. This is the chondrocyte. But in addition to that, you can see elastic fibers, these black lines or dark brown lines, whatever color you want to call them. All right, so these dark staining lines, that is going to be, all right, your elastic fibers. All right. So again, you're going to see elastic cartilage in places that need to resist or retain their shape. So the auricle or the pinna, all right, which is your ear. All right, you also have the epiglottis, which is that flap that covers your trachea, or the opening to your trachea, I should say, when you're swallowing food or swallowing liquids. All right, the next type of cartilage, one of my favorite types, is the fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is a tough cartilage. All right, and you can see the majority of what we're seeing. This right here, all this kind of pink-like structure material, that is collagen. All right, and you can see these dark purplish, bluish, all right, dots here. Those are the chondrocytes. They line up linearly, all right, in this type of tissue. And the white is the ground substance. Not a lot of ground substance here, if you notice. Okay, fibrocartilage has very little ground substance. All right, it also, all right, does not have a perichondrium. Perichondrium is this dense irregular connective tissue that surrounds the cartilage. Fibrocartilage does not have that. Hyaline cartilage has perichondrium. Elastic cartilage has perichondrium. Fibrocartilage does not. So there's only 3 places in the body that you will find fibrocartilage. Your intervertebral discs, that's in your spine. They sit in between the vertebrae there. They act as shock absorbers, and they give you a little bit of height. The pubic symphysis, that's where your 2 hip bones meet right in the front, right underneath your umbilicus, right about 2 inches below. Okay, and then the menisci of the knee, right? And those are these disc-like structures that sit in your knee, and again, they act as shock absorbers. All right, on to the other type of supportive connective tissue, and that is bone. And there's 2 types of bone, compact bone and spongy bone. All right, we're going to look at compact bone. So here's the overall picture of a compact bone. Okay, so you can see the circular type of pattern here. You got this black structure at the center, and then you've got all these smaller black dots around, but it almost looks like there's rings going around. All right, like this big circle, almost like a tree. All right, well, in bone, all right, we call these ring-like structures osteons. And at the center of the osteon, all right, we have, it's a hollowed out area. All right, we call that the central canal. All right, I'll describe that in a second here. But if you notice, we got these black little holes here. Okay, so inside those black holes live the predominant cell type for this tissue, where those are called osteocytes. Okay, so you've got these red dashed lines circling around or outlining these black holes here. Okay, and then the arrows are pointing to the inside, and those arrows are asking you about the osteocytes. Okay, and if you recall from the cartilage, right, the names of those spaces, right, those are called lacunae. Okay, so those red dashed lines represent the lacunae. All right, and the osteocytes live inside the lacunae. All right, at the center of our osteon, like I was mentioning before, you've got this black circular structure here, okay? And that black circular structure is called the central canal. And in the central canal, we have nerves and blood vessels, okay? Because we have to get those nutrients, all right, to the bone, all right, and throughout the bone. So we have these holes at the center, okay? And these ring-like structures that go around the central canal, all right, which kind of look like a tree, those are called lamellae. Okay, and there's different types of lamellae, which we'll talk about when we get to chapter 7. All right, but for right now, just know that these rings that go around the central canal are known as lamellae. And if you look close, all right, these lacuna have these little black lines that are coming out from them. This is a great example over here. You can see this lacuna and this lacuna over here. There's like these black lines that connect one to the other, okay? And those lines that connect the lacunae, all right, those are called cannuliculi. You can see this little yellow line is representing that. I like these over here better, okay? But they're connecting one, all right, lamellae to, one lacuna to another lacuna. And basically, inside, as you know, inside these lacuna, the osteocyte cells live, all right? But what they do is they can communicate with one another. They can share nutrients with one another through these cannuliculi. So it's really kind of a neat thing, all right? So you're going to find this type of tissue, right, in the bones of your body, okay? All right, finally, the last type of connective tissue is fluid connective tissue. And this slide here kind of shows you, all right, a picture of our fluid connective tissue, i.e. our blood. All right, so you can kind of see here, all right, we've got some red blood cells, right? That's the predominant cell type here in this slide here. Okay, those red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes. So you can see those are highlighted in blue in this slide. Right? Then you notice a bunch of little dots all over the place. All right, and those dots represent the platelets. So we go over here to this slide over here. Okay, those little blue highlighted dots, all right, that we saw earlier that were purple in this slide. All right, those are the platelets. So platelets are really, really small, but they're important for clotting our blood. And in addition to that, all right, we have white blood cells, right, that are found in our blood. Right, you can see here and here, right, those are neutrophils, and those are white blood cells. So if you get a bacterial infection, all right, those cells will be on hand to help with that. Okay, so you don't have this picture in your atlas, all right, but I just wanted you to be familiar with it to have a peek. All right, so that's the first two tissue types of the body, okay, epithelial tissue and connective tissue. And now we're going to move on to the third type, muscle tissue. All right, in muscle tissue, there's three types. You've got skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. And so we're going to talk about skeletal muscle tissue. So you can see here, this is a skeletal muscle cell, all right? And you can see that it's kind of like a cylindrical shaped structure here, okay? They're very long, but they're shaped in a cylinder-like fashion, all right? So if you notice on our slide, those darker kind of football-shaped or oval-shaped structures, those are the nuclei. So this one cell can have many nuclei. So we call it a multinucleated cell. Okay? And we'll get into the origin of why skeletal muscle cells have so many nuclei, excuse me. All right? And if you also notice, our skeletal muscle cell has a striped configuration to it, alternating dark and light stripes that run the entirety of the skeletal muscle cell. and we refer to those as striations. Okay, striations, and we'll talk more when we get to chapter 10 about what a striation is. Okay, so where do we find this tissue? Obviously in skeletal muscles. All right, located all over the place, and they're pretty much going to attach. All right, the muscles are going to attach to bones, or they'll attach even to the skin. Okay, so just know that this type of tissue is found in skeletal muscles. All right, the second type of muscle tissue is cardiac muscle tissue. All right, it's similar to skeletal muscle tissue because it also has striations. Okay, and these striations again have to do with the proteins that are involved with the contraction. Right, cardiac muscle tissue is a branched muscle tissue, which means, all right, I describe it to folks as a Y laying on its side. Okay, so you'll notice that it'll branch out. So you can see here's the cell that it branches this way and branches this way. This is another cell here, branches this way, it branches this way. All right, so cardiac muscles do branch out. All right, they are also striated. All right, they can have more than one nucleus too. They have up to two. Okay, so it's 1 to 2 nuclei per cell. But a new finding in this type of tissue is this guy right here, the intercalated discs, and these dark lines that you're seeing here. Okay, you can see one here and here. All right, and those dark lines are made up of what we call desmosomes and gap junctions. Desmosomes kind of hold the cells together, right? Like a seamstress or somebody that sews when they thread two pieces of cloth to one another. Right? That's what these desmosomes do. They hold the cells together quite nicely, quite snugly, and it helps to improve the efficiency of the contraction. It's a good thing because it's our heart, and we really want to maintain an efficient heart rate and heart cycle. There are also what we find in the intercalated discs are these gap junctions, and these are like these holes, like that allow communication from one cell to the next. And so they're found between two cells, and that helps with the conduction of the electrical signal that occurs in cardiac muscle tissue. Again, you'll learn more about that when you talk about the heart, right? But just know that when the heart, and we'll talk a little bit about it in the when we talk about the nervous system, right? But keep in mind that these gap junctions allow for communication in the electrical current system of the cardiac muscle. All right, so here you can see some pictures of the nuclei, these dark staining structures here and down here, okay? And where do we find this tissue? Real easy. In your heart wall, specifically called the myocardium. There was a question on the test asking where do you find this tissue, and you're going to say the heart. You wouldn't be wrong. You would be right. Right? Specifically, it's in the myocardium, which is the middle layer of the heart. All right. The final type of muscle tissue is smooth muscle tissue. And as you notice, we call it smooth muscle tissue because it's smooth. There's no striations. Right? And again, that has to do with the types of proteins that are involved. Okay? So you'll notice there's no striations. Okay? And you will see here on our smooth muscle tissue, all right, our nuclei right here. There's one, here's another, all right? All over the place. So you're going to find the smooth muscle tissue. Just one of the things I forgot to mention to you, skeletal muscle is a voluntary type of muscle tissue, which means you can control it, obviously. You know, if you want to scratch your head, all you have to do is think, all right, bend my elbow and my wrist and wiggle my fingers back and forth. That's all utilizing skeletal muscle tissue. All right? Cardiac muscle tissue is involuntary. You have no conscious, I shouldn't say conscious control. You have no voluntary control over that. You can't just stop your cardiac muscle tissue from contracting. All right? And then smooth muscle tissue is also involuntary. Okay, so you can't control when you want it to work and when you don't. So you're going to find this type of muscle tissue in the walls of your intestines. All right, a lot of it's going to be found in the viscera, the organs along your digestive tract, your urinary tract, and your circulatory system. All right, found in some of the blood vessels there, because we have to make the blood vessels bigger and smaller. All right, they undergo vasoconstriction and vasodilation, and so the smooth muscle helps with that. Okay. And then our last type of tissue in the whole body, all right, first type being epithelial tissue, the second type being connective tissue, and the third type being muscle tissue. And now our fourth and final type, really easy, is nervous tissue. Okay, also known as neural tissue. Here you can see the overall type of tissue here located, all right, on the slide. All right, and you notice you have this special cell type that look like to have all these little pointy things coming off. Those are the neurons, okay? And those are the superstar of the nervous tissue. And we'll talk about them in chapter 12, okay? When we learn about action potentials and all that. And then these other guys that you can see kind of poking around, these are known as glial cells. They're the support cells. They take care of the neurons. And we'll talk more about them too later on. And where do you find this type of tissue? You're going to find it in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. The first two on that list, brain and spinal cord, are found in the central nervous system. Nerves are found in the peripheral nervous system. Okay, well, that's it for all the slides for identification for tissues. I know it seems like a lot. That's why I'm recording this for you folks, and you guys can take a look at it at your earliest convenience again and again and again. All right. Don't forget to check out the show that I'm going to have up on the tissues, giving you a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation and kind of giving you a little bit more information, a little more detailed information about each of the specific tissues. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope I didn't cause any of you to fall asleep. And I will see you in class.